Hello, and welcome to the Australia-Indonesia's Pair Summit, where we have a look at the research done by our teams based in Australia and Indonesia, and also talk to some of those with an interest in the subject area being discussed. It's great to have you with us for day 3 of our Pair Summit. I'm Helen Brown, the lead of Communications and Outreach at the Australia-Indonesia Centre, and your moderator for the day. The Centre acknowledges the traditional owners, the Kulin Nations, of the land in Melbourne on which the AIC's head office is located. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Now, for your viewing, I'm going to suggest that you select the gallery view for watching this webinar. That will help you see the slides and the speakers. Also, if you're going to use our wonderful sign language interpreters, it will allow you to see them better as well. So if you have a moment now, switch to gallery view and we can give you a better viewing experience. And I'd like to acknowledge our wonderful sign language interpreters today, Pak Widodo and Bu Sonia, and also our partners Laguna for their translation services so that you can listen to this in either the Indonesian or English languages. Before I have a chat with our panel for the day, I would like to ask our guest speaker, Pak Airlangga Hartarto, the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs for the Republic of Indonesia, to make some opening remarks.
Honorable Ambassador Penny Williams, Honorable Dr. Eugene Sebastian, Executive Director of Australian-Indonesia Center, Honorable Representative of Government, Universities, Industry, and other stakeholders from both Indonesia and Australia, participants of 2021 Annual Summit of the Partnership for Australia-Indonesia Research, good morning. I wish you are staying safe and healthy. It is both pleasure and honor for me to deliver opening remarks on day 3 of this annual summit. I would like to extend my gratitude to the Australian-Indonesia Center for convening this important virtual meeting. I hope that this meeting would be a fruitful of thought and how we can work together to restore our economic during this pandemic. In such an important occasion, like this annual summit, I'm pleased to share with you the Indonesian economic outlook and the work of the government in supporting the community during COVID-19 pandemic on various sectors, among others, health, employment, micro and small medium enterprises, social protection, and food security. As we all know that COVID-19 pandemic has greatly affected most economics, including Indonesia. In the beginning of 2020, the impact on the household, micro, small, and medium enterprise corporation, as well as other economic stakeholders. We are blessed that the pandemic was under control. At the moment, it has been flattened for the last 140 days, and various policy on economic recovery was on the track, so that economic Indonesia has grown positively. Hopefully in the 4th quarter on year-on-year basis can be achieved between around 3.7 to 4%. We hope that business will follow to recover. Several sectors such as manufacturers, mining, plantation has been recovered earlier, and agriculture and real estate also have shown their resilience during the pandemic COVID-19. If we could maintain the momentum, we expect that the economic will grow in 2020 around 5.2%. The COVID-19 has created a challenge to tackle a rising unemployment. In August 2020, the pandemic affected around 29.12 million people, or 14.28% of working age population being categorized as unemployment temporarily, and most of these employees are working with reduced working hours. One of the programs that the government launched during the pandemic COVID was the pre-job card, the program to improve the competence of the workforce through vocational online training. And another purpose of this program is to maintain the purchasing power of the affected people or workers through a social assistance. Recipients of pre-job card program are generally young people ages 18 to 35 years with a level of education around high school or below. The pre-job cards cover all group of people, including women, that is having more than one independent or under one dependent family or household in the regional area. As of November 2021, there has been 78 million online registered for the pre-job card since the launching of pre-job card in 2020, and the numbers of recipients was around 11.4 million, and the total distributed incentive was around 25.1 trillion rupiah. In terms of economic recovery, the survey that conducted to evaluate the pre-job card, it shows that being registered and joining the program, the number of unemployment beneficiary decreased from 56% to 39.8%, and the recipients of incentive upon the completion of training also increasing their purchasing power of the workers and creating employment and entrepreneurship through the micro and small medium enterprises. Micro, small and medium enterprises also hard hit by the pandemic. The government also launching various policy to support and to empower them to survive during the COVID-19. The government undertakes serious social protection program that includes Smart Indonesian College Card, Smart Indonesia program on national health insurance for contribution assistance, and also for recipients of Family Hope program, the cash social assistance, as well as basic staple food cards. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemics, the government has also seen the food security as one of the important issues. And during the pandemic, since last year, Indonesia is self-sufficient on the rice productions. So it shows that the agriculture sector shown its resiliency in developing the economic on the rural side. The Indonesian government has established the national food system to increase food productions and to meet the national needs. And the government aim on 5 policy. One is sustainable domestic production and availability to fulfill the demand for quality and safe food. Second is conducive environment for local food development. The third is food access price stabilization. Number 4 is strengthening farmer corporation and efficiency of logistic of food distribution, and food assistance for household to maintain the food security. The application of technology in production, distribution, and consumption are mandatory to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of each process along the food value chain. Indonesia also make priority on the reform in agriculture sectors among others, in stabilization of price, integrated livestock, and intensifies and mechanization of agriculture work, as well as to control the land conversion for the agriculture purposes. I really hope that the summit could provide recommendations as well as the solution for the government policies. And I believe with the support of the Australian government, that the potential deliverables and concrete actions can be rolled out. And I'm looking forward to the result of the studies, especially the joint effort to reset, restore, and reboot the economic. And at the end, it will contribute to solve the health problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Pak Alanga Hatato, the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs for Indonesia, making those opening remarks very salient about the economic recovery of Indonesia and many other nations after the coronavirus pandemic, which is on our minds for today's discussions. So in our first panel, we're going to look at the road to recovery in terms of assessing the pandemic's impact on the tourism industry. Now, you know that the severe travel restrictions that were imposed by most countries to limit the spread of COVID-19 had an almost immediate and just as severe effect on the tourism industry. For Indonesia, that meant millions of people who relied on casual or informal roles in this sector for their livelihoods found themselves without work. And then there are the multitude of businesses that feed into the industry also finding themselves caught by a sudden loss of revenue. Today, we're going to have a look at some of those impacts on Indonesia and also discuss what needs to be considered as the tourism economy starts to reopen. We're going to have a great chat with our panelists about that. Now, you can put some questions to them, just put it into the Q&A box on your virtual screen. And also, I gave you a little tip earlier about gallery view so that you could keep across who's actually speaking. If you would like to just see the current participants for this session, you can untick show non-video participants in your view options. So you've just got to untick that show non-video participants, and then you'll get a leaner screen to look at. All right, with all that said, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists for today. Firstly, our two researchers, Dr. Yagen Sun, Senior Lecturer at the University of Queensland, and Dr. Ilmiawan Awolin, Lecturer at Universitas Airlangga. Those are the two co-leads of the research into how COVID-19 has impacted the tourism industry in Indonesia. Joining us as well, wonderful to have the Vice President of Public Policy, Government Relations and CSR with Traveloka, Bu Widyasari Listoyowulan. Now, she is across what is happening in the tourism scene. Traveloka is one of the biggest e-commerce tourism industry platforms in the country today, and has, of course, recently, well, last year, moved to Australia. So she's got some great insights to share as well. And finally, we are also very fortunate to have Dr. Futu Fature, a policy analyst with the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia, who has been keeping a very close eye on GDP and the impact of the loss of tourism on Indonesia's economy. So he's going to provide some great insights into that area. All right, so thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us today from all your different locations. I'm going to start off by helping the audience by giving them a bit of a landscape view of what happened over the past couple of years when it came to the tourism industry. So we'll get to the what's happening now and what we can do in the future. But for the moment, let's have a look at what happened. And I think Traveloka can give us, firstly, a very good commercial perspective on this. So I would ask Bu Widya from Traveloka, would you start by giving us an overview, what you were seeing over the past 2 years? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Bapak Ibu, good morning, everybody. Hope you are all safe and well. Thank you for having us today. Responding to your questions, Helen, it is indeed one of the industry that has been impacted so badly is traveling and tourism. And just like Pak Menteri said, that lots of people lost the job, and one of them is pretty much on tourism sector. Recently, ADB just released that 82% drop in inbound tourist expenditure this year in ASEAN country itself. And that impacted to 1.6 million job loss in Asian countries alone last year. But for us, Traveloka, as we are talking right now, is we see in the number on the screen that per November, actually 60 million Indonesian have received their first dose. And as we're speaking today, I think more than 50% of total population has been vaccinated, and the number of cases has been low in the quarter, predicted in Q4 this year. And as of course, with us, it's quite unfortunate situation when the pandemic hits. Nevertheless, next slide, please. We see that there is a positive, what you may call it, movement this far, starting from June until this year, Helen, where actually staycation has been increasing, and because of the confidence is growing because of the vaccination, then people start traveling. Next slide, please. Now, what we are, of course, we can talk later on, Helen, but we've been working a lot with the government of Indonesia, private sector, community in encouraging different lifestyle, healthier lifestyle. We work with partners across Indonesia to provide certification approved by the government, what we call it CHSE, which ensure that all the employees at the hotels or restaurant are vaccinated, and this will boost the confidence of customers when they travel. This is one of the effort that we've been doing so far. I will stop right here. Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Widya. That's fantastic. We will definitely get back to you with some of those points that you've raised. I'd now like to invite our researchers, Awalin and Ms. Yayen, to give a short presentation on their findings on the tourism industry. Now, I must note that they did this work the year before the Delta variant hit, basically. So please keep that in mind. Obviously, no one was expecting the strength of that variant, and it did change a lot of things. So we'll take this research, we'll have a look at it now, but we will be able to apply it to the current situation as well. Thank you, Yayen and Awalin.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to have this opportunity to share with you our research outputs. I would like to first introduce our research team. Besides Dr. Awalin, we also have another two colleagues at the University of Queensland join this project, Dr. Lin Jie Shi and Dr. Jie Wong. And we also collaborating with the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Tourism, as well as Statistics Indonesia for this project. We would like to especially thank Dr. Putu Paturi from the Ministry of Finance, because they provide such a critical parameters for us to undertake this project. So basically, this project wants to understand and estimate the amount of tourism workers that are affected in this pandemic. And we want to do so by providing high resolution informations. Typically, when we see such impact assessments, it always speaks about the total numbers of workers that are impacted. However, this information is insufficient for governments to decide an efficient responding policy. So in our project, we try to map out who are those vulnerable tourism workers in this pandemic by demographic variables and by regional specific informations. In other words, we want to pinpoint who are those people, where do they live, and what sectors they work for, so that the governments can provide on-target supports to those groups. So I just want to give you some backgrounds before the COVID pandemic. In fact, tourism is an important sector for the Indonesia economies. In 2019, both international travels as well as domestic travel contributes about 5.7% of national GDPs. And in 2019, Indonesia recorded the highest growth rate of their international arrivals among all Southeast countries. In other words, Indonesia is very competitive in attracting international visitors. However, with the COVID situations, we know that the tourism sector basically collapsed. The international travel has reduced by 75% and domestic travel has reduced by 50%. So the purpose of this project is to use economic models to understand who are those people that are being affected in this situation. So first, I would like to give you an overall overall outcome at the national levels. So we estimated from January to September, the 9-month period last year, tourism has lost $200 trillion within the 9-month period. And this corresponds to 1.7% reductions of GDP. But what's staggering is the impact on the employment. So as you can see from the numbers, they are around 3.4 million people, they are at risk. So this includes people that are working in the tourism sector, such as hotel, restaurants, transport, retailing, or any tour operator, as well as people that are working in the supply chain. Because when a hotel loses jobs, they will reduce the ordering from people that are working for these particular hotels. So they reduce the orders for food, they reduce the laundry service, they reduce all the marketing service for the hotels. So people in the supply chain are also affected. So if we look into the people in the sectors, as well as people in the supply chain, we estimate 3.4 million people are at risk just in this 9-month period alone. And then I'm going to pass over to my colleague, and Dr. Awaling is going to share with you the hotspots on the regional levels. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is based on our estimation. So basically, we are using interregional input-output and using the Indonesian labor statistic to estimate the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector employment. And as you can see, Bali is the most affected here with around 820,000 possible job losses. And the vulnerable groups, who are those who are youth and women and lower education, with lower education and also low income in this region, is exceeding 30% in this province. So the impact is very high in Bali. And then the second province is Yogyakarta, with around 242,000 possible job losses. And in this region, the economic risk for the vulnerable groups, such as women, youth, and those with low income and low education, is around 5 to 6 times than the average across the country. So it's quite high. And these two provinces are known to rely on tourism. And although Yogyakarta is not as famous as Bali in Australia, but in international level, Yogyakarta is quite famous for their cultural tourism. And then the third province is West Nusa Tenggara, which is next to Bali, with around 204,000 possible job losses. And in this region, female and lower educated workers, they have a very high unemployment rate, which is more than 10%. And with the increasing tourism activities in West Nusa Tenggara, this impact on the vulnerable group is very, very high as well. And West Nusa Tenggara is recently opening up for the international tourists, Maybe if you follow the World Superbike, it is recently conducted there. And the fourth province is Kepulauan Riau, which is in Sumatra, with around 114,000 estimated job losses. In this province, 1 in every 6 low-income and female workers related to tourism are expected to lose their job and their income. So those are the main provinces affected by the tourism, by the crisis of COVID in tourism. Okay. So back to you, Helen.
Lovely, thank you. And no surprise, I guess, that Bali is the most affected when it comes to job losses, but plenty of other areas in Indonesia also feeling the effects, which has to be noted because the government has a plan to improve those areas and make them more welcoming to tourists. So you do have to have a look at the workers that are in those areas and the skills that exist to make that possible. To give us a little bit more insight on the economic impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector and the policies that the government has introduced to try and help them through, I'm now joined by Dr. Putu Faturai, Policy Analyst at the Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. And as you heard, our co-lead researchers have been able to work with him to ensure that they've got the correct information about this impact. So, Pak Putu, thank you for joining us, and it's great to learn a bit more from you. Could you just take us through some of the information you have there?
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Good morning. My name is Putu. I'm a policy analyst at the Ministry of Finance. I also involved in the study carried out by Yayan and Alin team, and today I will provide the information about how the Indonesian government responds to the COVID-19, especially for the tourism sectors. So basically, in 2020, the economy is strong. The Indonesian economy is strong, but recover in 2020. If we look at here, the graphs, the Indonesian economy is strong by minus 2.1% in 2020, but recover projected to grow by 4% in 2021. In the tourism indicators, the tourism income fall from 16.9 billion in 2019 and become 3.5 billion. It's about 18% decrease in 2020, and it's getting lower into 2021 to become $0.4 billion in tourism income. For the international tourists, the number of tourists in 2020 is shrunk to 4.1 million from 16.1 million in 2019, and projected to become only 1.5 million in 2021. For domestic tourists, although it's reduced in 2020, but it's projected to recover slightly in 2021 because we have not too much restriction in 2021. And tourism employment, as explained by Yayan, also decreased in 2020 by 2 million jobs, and it's getting recover in 2020 to 14.3 million. Next slide, please. So the Indonesian government are responsive to COVID-19 pandemic. The allocation of the 2021 National Economic Recovery Program is about 774.7 trillion, or about 77 billion Australian dollar. Increase compared to the realization of the 2020 is about 575 trillion, or 57 billion Australian dollar. There are 5 sectors that focus on the government to recovery program. Is a health sector, social protection programs, medium, small, and micro, small, and medium enterprise support, and priority programs where the tourism sector is in these programs, and the business incentive. The health sectors is allocated about 214 trillion, social protection is about 186 trillion. Medium, small, micro, small, and medium support is about 162.4. Priority program is about 117 trillion, and business incentive about 60. Minister of Coordinating Economy is about in social protection. Cash job loss guarantee contribution is about 246 million workers, and so how to build the new normal in the tourism attractions. Next slide, please. And the social protection program aims to reduce unemployment and poverty. As we know from the study by Yayan, the impact of the tourism, COVID-19 on tourism impact the reducing of the number of employment. But the government provide such the social protection policy since 2020 and expanded today has been playing a very important role in protecting the poor and vulnerable. We, for example, provide hardship relief. For example, for conditional cash transfer for 10 million families, cash transfers for 10 million families, village fund cash transfer for 8 million families, electricity discount for 32.6 million beneficiaries. And also we provide food and education support. For example, staple food card, food assistance, and internet quota subsidy for online learning. And also support to the workforce for example, for pre-employment cards for 5.9 million people and wage subsidy to 8.8 million workers. And we can see in unemployment rate is declining in February 2021 from by 0.8 percentage point from August 20. And the poverty rate also declined in March 2021 by 0.05 percentage point compared to September 2020. And the quality of human resources as is reflected in Human Development Index is maintained amid the pandemic through the provision of health service and adequate education even during the pandemic. Next slide, please. And if we can see here, the restrained by the second wave COVID-19, mobility index has continued to strengthen since mid-August. And this is because the tourism, the source of the tourism sector is from the movement of the people. And we can see here, after experiencing a downward trend to minus 17.8 in July, the people mobility has consistently increased until mid-October. And consumption-related mobility also increases in August to October, mainly in retail, recreation, grocery, and pharmacy. This development is in line with relatively better COVID-19 situation. So basically, this is if the restriction is more or less, and then we can hope that the tourism sector will be recovered fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Futu. That's great. I'm just taking some notes from some of those numbers that you've put forward. Given what you've just said, particularly around the government assistance that has been provided to vulnerable people, I'd just like to check in with Aulin and Yayen. In your recommendations and report, you mentioned how important it was for the most vulnerable workers to receive government support and assistance during this time. Given what you've just seen and heard from the Ministry of Finance, do you think that what is happening is the kind of program that is needed to help these workers through this period and help them get back to work when it becomes more available?
Thank you, Helen. I think that's a good question. Yes, we do think the policies that's put forward by the government is really what the workers need right now. So based on the United Nations World Tourism Organization's recommendation, they think the cash transfer and salary subsidies are the best supports the governments can provide to the affected workers. And the reason for that is because tourism are experiencing a large-scale job losses at the same time. So the people who lost jobs basically have very similar skill sets. So you can imagine that the people who lost job has similar skill set as you, and you try to look for something that's also similar in nature. So a lot of competitions for new positions. So tourism workers who lost jobs in the current moment will have great difficulty to find a new position, to find new source of incomes. So the best way to help them is to provide cash transfer or subsidies on their salary. If they are still at the position, but their working hour has been reduced, their salary has been reduced. So in that kind of policy, basically we try to maintain the basic life or welfare of the workers they are directly affected.
Yes, I would like to add to Yayan's points that this year, the unemployment rate in the tourism sector is still very high because the tourism is still not opening up yet. So the cash transfers will help this job, those workers who lost the job, to maintain their daily needs, and it will be very important to make sure that they will survive during this difficult time.
And I think, I guess what we should note with that is that we're talking about people who have those more casual jobs, the people who we rely on to do cleaning, to do cooking, to be drivers, to do those behind the scenes roles, to be travel guides. They're the ones who, in your report, as you identified, are most likely to be without a job, whereas someone who's in a middle management role and can still sit at a desk and perhaps keep the business going. So it is those most vulnerable workers. Well, Widya, I'd like to go to you. We're told that the tourism sector, it's a slow start. Bali has opened up to international tourists, but the uptake is not there yet. The flights aren't coming in. But you also mentioned, the staycation or an increase in domestic tourism in terms of inquiry. So can you give us a sense of what is actually happening now in terms of trends and interest and bookings? Are we seeing any pickup?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Would you, Stephen, would you mind showing the slide number 5? Yeah, before I answer that particular questions, thank you for the questions. Here in Traveloka, Helen, we implement 4 key activities or 4 key strategy. Number 1 is collaboration. We believe that, if we want to make it stronger, then we will have to work together. This year itself, we work with the government and private sectors to provide vaccination center, not only in Jogja as one of our primary city, but in Jakarta, but also in the airport of International Airport Soekarno-Hatta. And we reach out more than 67,000 people to be vaccinated through this collaboration. Point number 2 is we have this adaptation strategy in which we actually train. Now, this is related to human resources, right? We train and socialize to our partner on how to maintain healthy and safe lifestyle in the partner's ecosystem, in the hotel, in the restaurant, and making sure that the certification provided by the government, which is CHSE, is implemented strategically. Point number 3 is innovation. We're listening to customer concerns throughout this year, right? Throughout these 2 years. And the customer concern has become the backbone of our innovation, Helen. That said, this year, we're going to launch the health service in Traveloka. This not only boosts the confidence to people who travels, but also to make sure that, the reminder that health is number 1 priority. You can travel, you can enjoy your time, but you have to be healthy in doing so, because this is not only for you, but for all the ecosystem, the tourism ecosystem. Point number 4 is the education. We keep the customer informed and educated on the situation on daily basis. In our platform, we have news, that is reliable, and data and stat that people actually can check and understand what's going on in the world and in Indonesia. Now, answering your specific questions, the trend of staycation, Helen, I guess because, you know, after we have lockdown, we are encouraged to work at home. Apparently, lots of, you know, young people prefer to, you know, to work not only at home, but perhaps in hotels, because there they can balance their life, right, between working and having a little bit of you know, of relaxing time. And that's why I think the staycation is actually increasing. Also, the car or the land transportation has been increasing as well, Helen. We see lots of people traveling using land services other than flight. Nevertheless, after the number of people who got vaccinated is increased, then we see the trend of people start, you know, mobilizing one place to another. But as a company that always comply, that always concerned with the situation and, you know, like support the government goal or agenda, everybody who book in our platform always have reminder on vaccination as well on COVID test before they travel. I hope I answered your question, Helen. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you did. And I want to pick up on your point around, you seem to have created a bit of an ecosystem, a collaborative ecosystem, working with the government and other partners to help the tourism industry pick up from a very difficult time. In the report, it was noted that collaboration between all players is the only way to help the industry come back stronger. So just quickly, I want to ask the researchers if that kind of plan is what they envisaged. And then we have a question from the audience, which I'm going to put to Pak Futu. So perhaps Pak Aulen and Yayan first. It just seems, you know, is what I love about Indonesia, that civil society, that's how can we work together to help everyone.
Yeah, maybe I can go first. Yes, I think the collaboration is the key. I think the collaboration has to happen between the business, the government, as well as the travelers. And with the collaboration, we are able to create a brand that Indonesia is safe to travel. And you also have the responsibility to travel safely so that you are fully vaccinated, you are not sick, you will not get other people sick as well. I want to share an outcome from my colleagues that who conducted a nationwide survey in Australia. So my colleague has been asking people in Australia what foreign destination you want to travel to after the international border begins to open. And then people give out answers that's a little bit surprised, because in the past, Indonesia is the top destination for Australians to visit in terms of foreign travel, because we are so close and Indonesia is so attractive. But right now, people's consideration change. They are not thinking about the most beautiful beach or the most beautiful temples in Indonesia, but rather they are thinking which city or which place are the most safest. So how do they define safest? Basically, these cities have a high vaccination rates. These cities has tourism business. They are able to implement a very detailed safety procedures to ensure that the people who arrive are healthy and to ensure their staff are healthy, so that we can create a very healthy environment, just as Vidya just mentioned. So I think the brand image is very important, because sometimes people don't have the exact information in terms of what kind of policy has been implemented at your destination. But if we can communicate the message to the potential travelers to ensure that, yes, we have did our best, we make sure every step has been taken care of. And if you follow the procedures, you can have a safe and healthy travel trips. So that's my point of view. And it's over to you, Aulen.
Okay, adding to the point from Yayan, in Indonesia, the government at the central is mostly giving like guidance. So it is up to the government at the province and district level, such as Bali, the province of Bali, they would need guidance from the central government. In this case, Indonesia has launched like Indonesia Care, which is like a certification that Ibu Widya has talked about. This is to show that tourists can come to Indonesia and feel safe when they travel in Indonesia. And recently, the Indonesian government in the middle of October opened up for international travelers from 19 countries. However, they're still not coming like as usual. However, with some international events such as the World Superbike in recent time, some of these international travelers have coming as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think, as Widya pointed out earlier, that they've been very strong in pursuing the use of that accreditation scheme, the Cleanliness, Health, Safety, Environment, Sustainability scheme, the CHSE, which is provided. And I thought it was interesting that you referred to it as a healthier lifestyle as the way to frame it. It's not just about being COVID safe, it's about a healthier lifestyle, which was interesting. I just will go to Pak Futu because we have a question from an audience member on how the informal workers in tourism can survive and the policies. You have answered it a little bit, but I guess perhaps having a look going forward, Dr. Futu, can you give us any idea of what the government might do? I know that the budget hasn't been fully realised, so maybe there's some ways that funding is going to be used.
Yeah, I think for informal sectors, because they're usually not registered in the official system, but we provide a lot of social processing program for them. For example, we provide the PKH program Keluarga Harapan in Indonesia is a cash transfers to 10 million people below the poverty line. Then we support it with 300,000 rupiah per month for about 6 months. So it's about 1.8 million per household. And then this is to help them to their purchasing power parity, to purchasing power, and then also to maintain their food. Because we provide also the food aid to the poor and the vulnerable groups. I think for this is will categorize as the informal sectors, because we know that informal sector also hit by the COVID-19 because because of the restriction of the movement of people, and then they cannot selling their products or work in the for example in the tourism sector. Then we provided with the many social assistance for them. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. One thing I'd like to cover off on briefly before we finish, we've just got a bit over 10 minutes, is we're talking about the healthy environment, the safe environment. I'm thinking about these workers and those connected to the tourism industry, about having the skills to apply these sorts of standards, because it's a whole new environment, isn't it? You have to not just implement the accreditation, but you have to have workers who give a sense that we know what we're doing, it's safe, you can feel comfortable here. Perhaps, Widya, to you first, any thoughts around that? Do we need to see workers being given more chance to skill up, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely, Helen. Thank you for raising that point. Definitely, because again, just like what you say, being clean or implementing CHSE is one thing, but how to maintain their skill to match with the need for future workforce in tourism in the future is very, very important. And therefore, actually, Traveloka works with the government as well to do this in a few areas in Indonesia. Helen, we train lots of tourism players in area close to Lombok and NTT as well as Bali, and we hope that we're still going to do this in the long run. But Helen, please allow me to give a really big credit to the government, because not only support in what you may call it subsidy or cash supported, but food to mention, government of Indonesia is actually doing lots of work that try to leverage the tourism or maintain the tourism industry. One of them is by the campaign of Bangga Berwisata Indonesia, as well as Bangga Buatan Indonesia, as well as the Kartu Prakerja itself. So lots of work that have been done by the government, and we really appreciate that. And we do really want to be part of the work. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. And Yayan or Alan, do you have anything to add to that? I know that's something that you wanted to look at.
Yes, so if I may, I would like to add the digital training for the female tourism entrepreneurship is really important. We found that in Indonesia, a lot of tourism business, in fact, was run by female entrepreneurs. And they operate a small or micro scale of business, but it's really vital for their families. And we also found that some of them are lacking the digital skills that's really required in this current moment. So when I say digital skills, I mean the ability to work comfortably with the software as well as the hardware. So when there's no tourist around, basically one important thing you can do is to keep contacts with your former customers. You can contact them through email, to e-newsletters, to social media platforms. But some of the entrepreneurs are really struggle with that element. So they lost contact with their customers. They are not able to provide them with the updated information in terms of, maybe our business are begin to operate. We already fully vaccinated. We have very good policy in terms of maintaining the hygiene level, etc. We feel that keeping the contacts with the customer is important. But in this current moment, everything you can do is through digital communication. Mm-hmm. So upskill their digital capability is important.
Yes, I'm adding to the point from Yayan is related to the policy for the tourism recovery. I think the government need to focus at the regional level, because like a very general policy with like one size fits all, it would not work. And it would be better if we looking at very specifically at each province, what they need and what happened to that provinces, and focusing on the tourism recovery, because like its provinces has different tourism style, such as Yogyakarta in Bali is completely different, as well as Lombok is also different. So it is very important to pay attention at the making sure that the policy fits to each of these provinces. Yes.
I'm noting some questions and I will get to them, but just quickly to Dr. Futo, I know this isn't your area, skills and training, but the government did provide vouchers for people during the 2 years of the pandemic to help them upskill. Is that something that you think can continue to be valuable, or perhaps tweaked to as in a regional way, as an example of a way to help these workers?
Yeah, I think besides the improvement of the skills, we also have now, I think in 2020 and 2021, we provide the pre-employment card, and then the people for about 10 million workers can submit, apply for the training online, and then they also get some cash money for that. And then I think this can improve their skills, especially in the tourism sectors, because when there is no job, they are still at home, then they can involve in the training, and then get the improvement for their skills. So I think this is a good program. And also to respond to Aline about the regional response, I think one of the aid from the government is the transfer as a block grant to the local government. So I think the local government has a big power to allocate the fund to help the tourism sectors. Yeah.
Helen, may I add one quick point, Helen? So here I forgot to add, and thank you, Dr. Yayan, for pointing this out. There are two prongs in here in Traveloka that we've been doing, Helen. For the tourism worker, actually, because we are, our backbone is innovation and technology, we try to encourage more partners to go digital. Having said that, we actually provide them on how, have the access to email, how to respond to customers using more digital platforms, so they have higher knowledge, so they can do research by themselves in trying to mitigate at least the situation that, that are surrounding in their area. That's prong one. And prong two, Helen, we're not only talking about the tourism player, but we talk about the youth. This has been 2 years of pandemic, and we have in Indonesia, there are so many young people who want to innovate, who want to create jobs. So Traveloka is actually also providing training for them. We work with government and also one of our strongest partners also from Australia. We work with institutions, we work with government to provide training on technology, on digital, with the hope that it's them who will create more job for those who lost job in the future. Thank you. Over to you.
Very good points. Thank you for bringing that up. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but we've got a question, one from Ide, and I think that's probably better answered by the researchers. It relates to some research that you're doing. So I think they might have some ideas for you. We'll direct that question to them, and if they can't answer now, we'll get back to you later. There's also a question from Dedi Setiowan around travel bubbles. Now, this is what we would all love, if we could have a little bubble with the country we would like to visit, but I think, Delta ruined that, and now the new variants are going to always put a slight spanner in the works. If I could just get some ideas briefly from you, and I'm guessing, Widya, you might be in a good position to answer this. Are we getting any signs of a bubble vacation corridor between Indonesia and Australia yet?
I mean, we hope so, but just like what you say, this is so unpredictable, right? With the recent information, but we do hope so that there's big change in tourism industry very soon, and based on the research from the World Bank, they say that the change will go very soon next year, and we are looking forward to seeing that, Helen.
And does anyone else have any inside information they can share? No, we're all just fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Widya. Look, it's it is so tricky trying to make decisions around the tourism sector and what's safe, what is not safe. Clearly, the tourism industry in Indonesia is finding ways to have accreditation, to keep people going through this very tricky time. I think we should also just talk briefly about, it's going to be a new normal. We're going to have to do rapid tests. I think there was a conference in Bali over the weekend, and before you went into the hall, you did a PCR rapid test. This is something we're going to have to get used to. How important is it that people accept that, these are the things we're going to have to do? You mentioned it briefly, but I guess a hands up. Who thinks that PCR testing will be around for at least a year? Yeah, Widget, great. I've chosen the right one. Oh, the researchers aren't sure. And Pak Futu is with the government, so he's not allowed to say anything.
may I add one point on that, Helen? I mean, this is, this personal perspective. I mean, the thing is, if we have that test, we actually travel with more confidence. That's point number one, right? Mm-hmm. We actually our sanity level actually, right? And that's number one. Point number two is, if we are safe and then we travel, then the people in the destination will be also safe, and I think it's always better to save for every, to create like safety net for everybody.
I think that's an excellent point to end on. Thank you so much, Widya, and thank you to all our panelists today for for their great conversation and answers to our questions. Could you please join me in thanking Dr. Yayan Sun, Senior Lecturer at the University of Queensland, Dr. Ilmiawan Awalin, Lecturer at Universitas Erlangga, Widyasari Listo-Wulan, Vice President of Public Policy, Government Relations and CSR at Traveloka, and Dr. Futu Fature, Policy Analyst at the Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. Thank you all very much for your time today. That's been great. Okay, well now we're going to take a short break before starting the next session, which looks at the perplexing question of health versus economy in a pandemic. What do you choose? Before we start that subject, take some time, stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee or tea or a drink of water, and join us again in about 10 minutes, and we'll have a look at that impossible question. Thanks so much for your attention so far. Hello, I'm Helen Brown. Welcome to our session on health or economy in Indonesia, making the best impossible decision during COVID-19. As I mentioned, I'm Helen Brown. I'm the lead for the communications and outreach team at the Australia-Indonesia Centre, and it's our pleasure to bring you the third day of the PAIR Summit. Now, for your viewing, we suggest that you select the gallery view for watching this webinar. It will allow you to see all the speakers, including our sign language specialists. And at the moment, we're joined by Ibu Sonia from In Asli, which is lovely to have her with us. Earlier, we had Pak Widodo. And if you only want to see the speakers, rather than just every screen that's up in this, in your view options, you can click on the Show Non-Video Participants box or unclick it. And you can find that by, there's, those three little dots at the top of one of the screens. So have a look for that as well, and that will make it a smoother viewing experience for you, but also allow you to see everyone and the slides and our specialists. Okay, so in this session, we're going to talk to our researchers who've looked at one of the biggest challenges facing policymakers in the coronavirus pandemic. How do you balance out the economic needs of a community while protecting people's health and also managing health systems? Now, the Indonesian government is not alone in struggling to get this balance right. In that country, though, particularly, we saw infections soar. It had one of the highest infection rates in Southeast Asia at one point. And also, though, many people were left in precarious financial positions. They couldn't socially distance, or if they did, it meant they literally could not go onto the streets and work and earn an income. So imagine trying to decide which way to go, and it does seem like an either-or question. What do you look after the most? So what the research team at the Australia-Indonesia Centre set out to do was look at the modelling, the mathematical modelling, the social modelling around these two questions, and finding models that they could combine to measure the impact depending on the action taken. So if you decided to focus more on health, what would that mean for the economy, or vice versa? Now, they're going to take us through that modelling and why they came up with it. We're also joined by someone who has a commercial perspective on this challenging question for governments, and in particular for Indonesia. So with that all said, I will introduce our panelists. Firstly, Dr. Pierre Lebodig is the COVID-19 research co-lead at Monash University in Melbourne. We're also joined by Associate Professor Sri Astuti Tamrin, COVID-19 research co-lead at Universitas Hasanuddin. And finally, the third panelist is John Doveston, who is a partner for Asia Pacific with PwC, and John is based in Jakarta, so he's definitely got a grounds eye view of what's happening in that country. Thank you all very much for joining us today. It's much appreciated. I think that perhaps what we do need to do is understand the background to the research first, and maybe Ibu Tuti, could you perhaps just start off by explaining some of the work that you've done, and then I think I'll get Dr. Pierre to go through some of the findings.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me a chance to present our COVID-19 project. And this is an honor for me to be here. I am Sri Astuti Tamrin from Universitas Hasanuddin. In this section, I would like to present our project titled Health or Economy, Making the Best Impossible Decision. This is our project collaboration between Universitas Hasanuddin and Monash University, funded by IEC as a part of partnership for Australia-Indonesia research. We are a large team, people with a short project timeline consists of Sudirman Nasir, Firdaus Kasim, Dewi Lestari, Salman Samir, Siswanto from Universitas Hasanuddin, and Pierre, Andreas, Ahmad, Kasimi, and Andrew from Monash University. As we know that reducing economic activity is necessary to help contain the spread of COVID-19 and save lives. However, the consequence of economic decline can be long-standing, and for people in extreme financial precarity lead to life-threatening situation. And government need to make the impossible decision of optimizing well-being of their population from both a health and economical perspective in the short to long term. And as we know, managing the COVID pandemic requires making some tough choices between protecting health and the economy. And most modeling only consider one of these. Indonesia announced the first cases of COVID-19 on March 2020. And since the first cases, several non-pharmaceutical interventions have been implemented in Indonesia. The first intervention was the introduction of thermal scanning at public places. And additional, Indonesia national government imposed order for public to conduct social distancing and school university closure. These interventions were followed by face mask obligation at public places. Provincial government also introduced their containment intervention we call large-scale social restriction, or PSBB. PSBB is policy. It's not actually a national policy. It's a policy in which each region needs to meet certain criteria and obtain approval from the central government in implementing it. And in Indonesia, there are 22 cities or districts that implement the PSBB. Unlike other countries in the world, Indonesia is struggling in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, with the exception several countries, especially East Asia countries, that have had a pandemic response protocol as well in place due to their experiences in dealing with the pandemic in 2011. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit the Indonesian economy quite hard. Slowing COVID means slowing the economy. And what's the right balance between this opposing objective of keeping people healthy and keeping the economic strong? Can both aspects be considered in a single model to better understand the trade-off? Therefore, the aim of our project is to create a scientific model to help local and national government decide how to maximize economic activity while keeping COVID-19 under control. And in our study, there are two kinds of data used, namely input-output 2010 as economic data and COVID-19 data set as well. And actually, this is hard to get and often quite historical and need to make lots of assumptions about parameter of the model. And the model is still quite simple, but given input data corresponding to COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia, we will analyze the solution provided by our model and compare them with a simple baseline that consists in having no governmental intervention in order to assess the methodology, we have measures such as lockdowns have on both or this aspect. And the detail of our methodology will be explained more by our colleague, Fiere. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Bututi. That's great background to the research that you've done. Pierre, I will bring you in here. Lovely to have you join us. Now, you are an optimization expert. So many things I could say.
Yeah.
How do you optimize my life? But when it comes to mathematical modeling, you've developed this hybrid model. Before we go into it a little bit, I just want to understand why you've brought together a lot of disciplines to do this. Is that one of the reasons why you think this is a reasonably tight model that you've come up with?
Yeah, I guess, you know, so I'm good at models, but the problem is, you know, you could make a model and you think it's good, but until people who actually deal with the reality look at your model and say, okay, this is a good parameter or not, then really the model is not really tested. And in this particular case, well, we needed people on the ground who had, you know, health knowledge, economy knowledge, all that stuff. To tell us, you know, whether our model made any sense or not. So, but we had an idea of what the problem was in terms of the, you know, how we could model the problem, but then whether that held any water, whether that made any sense. So we needed the Hassanuddin team to tell us whether that was the case or not, and not just that, but also to give us the data, because it's extremely hard to get all of this data. We need, you know, economy data for all the provinces and all the sectors, and we need the health data. So that's definitely something that we're completely reliant on them to get.
Okay, well, I think if you don't mind, we've got a bit of a hypothetical set up where we modeled this. And we can put up an infographic just to show people. Now, there is a bit of information on it. It's where you've applied the modeling, and we've got sort of the two extreme scenarios, and then we've got 3 in between, which is tweaking the settings, so to speak. I'll just let people know, Pierre, that the assumptions for this are that we're talking about a 6-month time period, 3 identical regions, A, B, and C. Region A has an exposed population of 1,000, so they're infected but not yet infectious. Regions B and C have 0 exposed population. Each region has a population of 5 million, 100 hospital beds, 10 ICU beds, and a customer demand of 100 million rupiah. Now, I'm thinking customer demand, that's a function of GDP in a single economic sector. So we're looking at different provinces, yeah. Okay, so lots in that, but perhaps just talk us through what this, you know, you've applied these hypothetically, the modelling, and what that shows us. And we're just on screen now, you can see those scenarios. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So first I want to say, why is it that we're showing this hypothetical scenario? We thought, so we did the study on the actual data, and it's just a bit too sensitive to say, oh, what happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? How many people die? That's a bit too sensitive. And also this was a study that was done pre-vaccine and pre-Delta. And so the data would not really be relevant today anyway. And so we have this hypothetical scenario where we still make the same decisions as in our original study. And the decisions are whether we trigger a soft lockdown, a hard lockdown in the 3 cities, or in which we can decide individually. And then we also have connections between the cities, which we can close. And then every time we impose a lockdown, or every time we close a connection between cities, of course, the pandemic starts spreading less, but also the economy suffers. And I guess here we wanted to try, you know, which were the different trade-offs, you know, in terms of if we close everything, or if we leave everything open, what are the trade-offs? And here at the top, we have the 2 extremes that Helen indicated. And so on the left at the top, this is the health focus. So basically, we close everything, all the roads, full lockdown. And so we get an economic shortfall of 20%, which means compared to not doing anything, we lose essentially 20% of GDP for that particular example in 1 year. But in exchange, we really minimize the number of deaths in this example. And so we have 162 deaths. And if we take the other extreme of this example, then we leave everything open. And here it says 0% shortfall. In practice, it's not exactly zero. There's a little bit of shortfall because there's economic implications of having people who die and having people who are sick, but it's very marginal compared to actually shutting down everything. And so but in this case, you have 4,000 deaths, and that's after 6 months. Of course, at this point, if we continued the simulation, because we have many more infected people, it would continue to climb exponentially, but that's beyond the scope of this example. Helen, maybe I want to go back to you if you want to add anything at this point.
That's fine. Yeah, thanks, Pierre. I'm sure that we'll definitely delve into that. But what we're trying to do here is say, look, here's a model and here's a way, here's how it actually works in real life. Of course, not every model's perfect, so we will eventually be putting out the full methodology behind this research. I apologize, Pierre, I'm sure you're close to perfect. But the science of research is we're always looking to improve. So the Australia-Indonesia Centre will be making this full modelling available in the near future so that people can take a look at it. I want to go more into it, but I want to bring John Doverston into the conversation now, just to get a sense, John, on the ground, the challenge that was going on between choosing the economy and choosing people's health. Two things, really high stakes when it comes to Indonesia. You're talking about a large informal sector, but also a health system that wasn't prepared for the impacts of pandemic scale. So take us a bit through what you saw happening in Indonesia and where it's at now, because this modelling was done during a particularly pre-Delta, but just when we realised how serious this was.
Yeah, thanks, Helen, and it's certainly great to be here, and good morning and good afternoon for everyone that's joined us, depending on where you are located today. You're right, it is an impossible question, and I congratulate our colleagues on preparing the modelling, because it is a very challenging and continues to be a very challenging point here. Maybe I can just talk about a couple of the economics, and what's important with this pandemic is really it's a health crisis. And previously we've had crises around the GFC and the oil price shocks and such like that, which were largely financial crisis, and people could still go about their day-to-day work and still mingle with each other. And obviously from a GDP perspective, globally, this is estimated to have about a 3.5% decline in global GDP as compared to, say, the GFC that had a 1.79%. And obviously there's health issues, there's just people's mental health issues as well as their physical health issues. In Indonesia, they've actually restarted some of the lockdowns because of the new variant, and still as they race to get a higher level of vaccination. What that means on the street is that to go into anywhere, you really need to show that you're vaccinated. They've got a very good tracing app that they use, and a check-in app that has progressed over the time. But maybe if I just talk a little bit about the economy, and I've joined some of the other sessions, Helen, and there's been a lot of data that's been put out there, and hopefully the people joining today have had a chance to look at that across the different sectors. But the ramifications of what happened with this physical distancing is about 1.8 million people became unemployed through to February 21. Another 3.2 exited the labour market. And I think strikingly, 2.8 million people have fallen back into poverty over that period of time, because, as you mentioned, the largely informal sector is a very significant informal sector of employment, which is, if you think about the contractors and gig workers and such like that, and the types of industries that people work in around the retail, manufacturing and farming. So now the government has importantly provided a lot of social support. And I think what we've seen even around the globe is the lockdown, the vaccination rates then increase, which releases the lockdown and social support. But in some countries, we can see actually quite a lot of disharmony with the public, right? We're seeing protests around the globe occur and such like that. And I think in Indonesia, from my lens, they've done a really good job at balancing that, and for people actually obeying and complying with the rules. I flew in here in March earlier this year, so it was probably at the height of the period of the pandemic. So and maybe just one other comment I'd make on there, and the models, as Pierre said, can't be perfect, but the impact, and I've got 4 kids, and a lot of my team have a lot of kids, across there, and you'll see people working at home with a kid on their lap, or the kids running around and joining the video call. And there's been a lot of kids out of school, and an interesting sort of statistic I looked at, that they said 7 million new graduates, about 500,000 fewer youth entered the labour force in 2020. So people are being called the sort of the COVID-19 schooling. And I think what's the ramifications of that as Indonesia continues to grow in many areas? Education is vital, that ongoing growth. So maybe that's a couple of comments, Helen.
That's great. Thank you very much. Ibu Tuti, getting a sense from you, you're based in Makassar, that's where the university is. How helpful do you think this model would be to provincial governments, Makassar as an example, that have been dealing with high infection rates?
Okay, thank you, Harold. Even though this model is quite simple, but this model is being useful for Indonesia, especially in South Sulawesi, because we know the economic recovery cannot be achieved without significant progress in controlling the pandemic. And by creating a scientific model, we can help local and national governments to decide how to maximize economic activity while keeping COVID-19 under control. And this is not just for Indonesia or South Sulawesi, but also for other countries and other provinces in the world, because countries that control the pandemic better also achieve more meaningful economic recovery.
Thank you. And Pierre, of course, we now have vaccination. We've gone through the Delta variant as well. Your modelling was done pre that. How can it be used, even though we have these other variables turning up?
So you would need to adjust some parameters and possibly some of the modeling as well. So in the current model that we're using, which is an SEIR model, which is super classic in epidemiology, then you sort of categorize people between people who are susceptible to get infected, who have been infected, who have recovered, and so on. And I guess if we had people who were vaccinated, we could simply duplicate these number of cases into people who are vaccinated and non-vaccinated. And then we would just need to add the data that's missing between these blocks, which is, well, how likely are you to recover if you're infected, but you're vaccinated? So we would need to add these parameters in, but from then on, the model would be good to go again.
So it is something that can be shaped to the circumstances. It's tractable, so to speak.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say tractable, because in my field, usually it means you can actually compute the solution. But in this particular case, the model would become more complex. And so most likely it would take longer to run. And that's always an issue. And this is currently a limitation of our approach, even though from an outsider's point of view, it might look very simple. It is already complicated from the point of view of a machine. And interestingly, everybody is very critical to our decision makers about, whether they make the right decisions for us. But in fact, even in this very simplified model, a computer is not able to find the best solution. So anyway.
Yes. It's another tool then, potentially another very handy tool. And I'm wondering, Ibu Tuti, questions around, so Indonesia, like many countries, has relied on information, say, around data mobility. Where are people moving? Are they moving? Are the restrictions working? And then on the other side, you've got hospitalization rates, etc. Does this model use that sort of information around mobility, or is it just something completely different for policymakers to consider? I get the question is actually, would it help them make a decision about coming out of lockdown or easing restrictions? Because that's, where one of the tensions was.
Helen, actually, in our model, economic activity is highly depend on openness and connectivity. And in this case, we use transport and logistic moving goods between area. Also, movement of people feel shortages in the workplace. So stimulation of demand through movement of people in both locally and long distance, like tourism, is still possible to apply in the next model, I think. But as Pierre say, it's a need more hard work and more multidisciplinary people that can involve in our next extant model, Helen.
Fantastic, thank you. And just a reminder, you can put a question to the panelist in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It normally is. John, I want to ask you a question, but did you have anything you wanted to add off the back of that?
I think modelling is a really important part to, obviously, there's no rule book for a pandemic of this nature. With a really connected global world, we jump on planes, we see how quickly it moves. We see how quickly vaccine makers have come in. We're now seeing certain countries require booster shots. So I think modelling is very important. We've got some really intelligent people out there that access data, historical data, use that data to project forward. And I think that is really important in policy making decisions, economical decisions, because we've really got to balance the two. And of course, one life lost is too many lost. And so it is really an impossible situation. And how do these experiences and how do the models actually, as they will gather more data as we live through this pandemic, how will they inform future decisions and future focus areas and future preparedness? So I don't think a model just exists for the lockdown phase. I think a model just begins at the lockdown phase with that important data and takes us forward and looks at, what sort of supply chain for vaccinations, what sort of manufacturing, what sort of storage, and what sort of medical support and types of things can inform, government policy and business policy making going forward.
And speaking about business policy, how did business read the signs from government? I'm thinking more big business now. We can talk about the informal sector in a moment. But when it comes to the bigger companies, John, how are they reading the government's moves? And are they starting to come out now? There was an easing of restrictions. We've seen a slight tightening again, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, look, I think everyone's been in this together, right? Because there's not one person in my team or one person in the market that I talk to that hasn't been directly impacted by COVID and negatively impacted, whether it's been the loss of family member lives or themselves being impacted. So I think, the alignment has been very strong. I think from a business perspective, businesses, I work a lot with financial services and the services industries and such, they very quickly pivoted and probably accelerated their digital transformation. Someone had said to me, it used to take a long time to get certain things done around organizing teams within an organization to come together to enable online, to enable digital transformation. And when the pandemic came, they had a unifying event that enabled a lot of the teams within an organization come together and quickly accelerate, banking and others, how their customers, online retailing. And so I think people have really adjusted to the circumstance and modified their working behaviors accordingly. In my office, we still, because we can work remotely, people don't come into the office and still continue to work remotely. I think that what it did start to do was really accelerate the public's transition to the digital economy, which is a very big part of Indonesia. There's a number of unicorns that have been established in Indonesia, which are all around that digital economy. And in previous sessions that we've heard about the educational programs and such that are going in there. But, it's all about transformation in Indonesia. It's transformation of supply chains, transformation of workforce, transformation of customer experience, transformation of the business, transformation of the economy. And I think, therefore, that we're in this medical situation together has people behave appropriately. People are fully masked when you walk around. I mean, I live in Jakarta, so I see it from that front. But I also see that these unifying sort of digital acceleration points have been really, creation of online channels and such. Now, that goes to the medium and small size enterprises and their ability to participate in that. But from the big business end of town, there's certainly been, alliance with the government's policy, and we haven't seen social disruption like we're seeing in other countries, Helen.
Thanks very much, John. And it should be noted that some studies have shown there was a distinct pivot by MSMEs as well to the digital or the e-commerce online space, a little bit dependent on ability to take up digital skills, which is something we discussed in one of the last sessions, actually. But I think that there's some really good points, so thank you. One of the other things that we see happening in this, as the question around health versus economy is thrown around, that whichever decision is made, there are accusations or observations about someone's agenda being at play. Maybe so-and-so sector wants the economy to open up more, or somebody else is more interested in the health sector. How does this modelling help with those perhaps internal agendas? Ease may not be the word, but provide some kind of guide as to how the decisions are being made. So there's less of that question around is this a particular agenda? A bit of a convoluted question, but it's about transparency, really, isn't it? About the decisions. Do you think this model helps with that? And I'd be keen to hear from Bu Tuti first, given her experience on the ground, and Pierre as well.
So Tuti, are you going first?
You can go in first, Pierre.
Teamwork.
I think Helen wanted you to go first, so please go ahead. I just wasn't sure whether you were unmuted or something. Go for it, Tuti.
Okay then. As said by Helen, it seems the economic recovery in Indonesia, as I said before, cannot be achieved without significant progress in controlling this pandemic. And then, as John said also, that actually data is, because I'm involved in data in this project, data is hard to get and often quite historical. And then we need to make lots of assumption about parameter of the model. And data on COVID is now more readily available compared when modeling was first done by our team. And then exact value for economic impact are less important than the relative size as well. And then that's why external impact or shocks like impact of international shipping capacity, cost of import, it's hard to predict and include in our model as well. And besides that, computationally optimization is model is, as said by Pierre, is very large and difficult to solve as well. But even though our model is still quite simple, but we can make this more sophisticated, but limited by data and computation power. My question is, can reliable enough result to produce quickly enough to make a model contribution to a policy? I think that's a more big question that we need to answer for the next research, I think, Helen.
Very good, well noted, thank you. And Pierre?
Yeah, so on the question of whether a model is useful to policy makers, I think it is absolutely useful. I'm not saying, our particular model and methods are, more useful than others, but I think it's very important to have a model, especially if you can make that model public. In particular, well, everybody's concerned, but there's also a lot of misinformation about whether the government even wants what's best for us. And, I think it's important for anybody who makes these important decisions to have a justification and be able to show everyone that, okay, this is the data we have, this is the model we have, these are the conclusions. Now, if you disagree, you need to disagree with the data or the method, but if you put the two together, you get the decision. So I think it makes it very easy for the government to open a discussion that is about what's best for everyone rather than just people attacking them. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand. We've got a question now from the audience, and Bututi and Pierre, you'll be able to answer it. But John, I think you could also provide some perspective on how rural Indonesia is different to the more populated areas. The question is, in Indonesia, as in Australia and other parts of the world, the spread of COVID centres around the highly populated areas. Capital-centred decisions tend to not serve the needs of the regional areas. How should governments make decisions that accommodate the needs of the rural areas that are less impacted to ensure that their economy is supported and protected? Now, Pierre and Bututi, I'm guessing that those areas could use this modelling as well as an example. And the Indonesian government has been sort of working province by province in terms of social restrictions. And then, John, your thoughts on that sort of city-rural conundrum. Pierre, you might like to go first this time, then Bututi, and then John.
Sure. Yeah, so look, I don't have much, but I think it's really tough to include fairness in models because even defining fairness formally is extremely difficult. What is the fair decision? If you segregate, let's say, rural and urban areas, maybe if you do the same for everyone, at least it's fair on some level, but perhaps one area will suffer more than the other. And so I don't actually have a good solution. I acknowledge that this is a problem and our model doesn't address it. We could definitely try to include something, but right now it's super tricky. I don't know what I would do to include it in our model. So yeah, no good solution, sorry.
That's okay. It's a good question. We can't have answers for everything. We just, need to keep trying. Bututi.
Actually significant effect on both economy and health from policy measures and border closures. It's important to consider these simultaneous because why? If the government apply smart policy setting, that make generally perform better than single static approach. That's why clear opportunity to have such as a trade-off solution that avoid the extreme of both health and economic impact. And I think that's a promising approach, but a lot more work to be done, Helen, to answer the audience question about how we involve, like in our model, and consider the rural compared to the urban area.
Thank you, Bu Tuti, and John.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And I just add my comments to the agenda point. I think around the modelling informing decisions, the previous question. So to me, it's 3 words: information, transparency, and trust. And I think that if people are dealt information that's transparent, the information around modelling and economic balance is there, then they build trust in what people are saying and will align to that. I think this question's a really good question. This really points in probably my involvement around the large informal sector and where that informal sector actually sits. Interestingly, it's, you know, they estimate, I read one report that estimated that the informal sector is about 3/4 of Indonesia's labour force, could be classified as that. So I think that often in those areas, it's around the agriculture, wholesale, retail trade and manufacturing, and many of those are obviously situated outside of the main capital cities. The government has obviously embarked on a number of social benefits, so food, utilities relief, some payment and such like that. Also, I would say to my earlier comment about the ability of students and people to access a digital environment, whether that's online schooling for the hours they need to whether they have a appropriate sort of infrastructure around them to actually enable the kids to be at school, whether the parents are out working, or whether that's, you know, other studies I've looked at indicate a number of people, students took up other jobs whilst they were still at school. So I think those segmentation of those types of, you know, again, as Pierre said, we could do a lot of things in, as he said, we could do a lot of things in a model, but I think that the government has tried to do that from more the social benefits perspective. But I think that, again, to me, it informs what's our learning today of what some of the additional support and some of the infrastructure that needs to be put in place in those communities. So whilst that's not an answer, I think that we know more today from the data than we have historically known, and it's an opportunity therefore to further enhance the well-being of people in those communities.
And just briefly to wrap up, when we look at this question of health and or economy, can I get a quick point from all of you on what you're seeing where you are now? And that includes you, Pierre, in Australia, you know, as policymakers grapple with this question. So Bu Tuti, I'll start with you, just to give us a quick snapshot of what is happening now for you, where you are in Indonesia, and then John, and then Pierre to finish.
Thank you, Helen. Actually, it's really hard decision which one should government choose between economic and health, because both of them is more important at the moment. But as I said before, that slowing COVID means slowing the economy. That's why in this case, the government need to more carefully decide which one should they prefer first, either economic or in health. Because I say that it seems that the government in Indonesia tends to focus more on handling the economy than health at the first time. And then we can see that the government did not want to take a firm step to hinder human mobility. So when the government is more focused keeping the economy going, and then the number of confirmed positive cases is increasing, and our health system is overwhelmed. That's why at the same time, the economic activity is naturally slowing down as people avoid shopping some places. That's why my closing statement that slowing COVID means slowing the economy, and then the Indonesian government need to carefully make a policy and its uncertainty situation right now. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Bu Tuti. It's just laying it out as it is. Thank you. John?
Yeah, so I think Indonesia continues to be a significantly growing economy, and I think that there's a lot of that transformation, albeit a lot more digital, being enabled. Whilst I agree 100% with Ibu Tuti's points about you need to have a healthy society to enable that. So I think it is a very fine balance. As you walk around the street, you see a lot more people out exercising on bikes they've bought. If I think about Serdiman in Jakarta, you see a lot of shops that have closed down, and you go to some of the shopping malls and they're very empty. And that's, again, to the earlier comment, that's a Jakarta lens, if you like. So I think the government is trying to balance it. I think that that's really hinged on a continued vaccination and reductions of the spread of variants that might come out. But there's unquestionably, Indonesia will continue to transform and grow as a nation. That's the nature of life here, if you like. So, but that will obviously be significantly impacted whilst the pandemic remains.
Thank you, John. And finally to you, Pierre.
Yeah, so look, I think Australia is extremely lucky because, this economy versus health problem is a lot easier. In my mind, in Indonesia and in many developing countries, you have to choose between health and economy, but then if economy suffers too much, then in turn, there's repercussions for health, and so it's even more complicated than what we have modeled. And in a sense, in Australia, my perspective, and at least relatively speaking, people who have not been able to work because of lockdowns or something like this, I don't think they have suffered quite as much as people in Indonesia. So the problem is a lot easier, which is not to say that, it's still not complicated, but I think we're very lucky in Australia in that respect. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you, for that fantastic conversation. Such a big question and so hard to encapsulate it in a panel discussion without showing you the modelling. Although, mind you, I have seen the modelling and I have no idea what all those numbers are. So I need to do a maths course again. And we are going to release that modelling to you as well very soon. If you have signed up to the Australia-Indonesia Centre updates, you will get a notice about that. If you've registered for this webinar and have signed up for the updates, then you will get a notice as to when that full report is available. And that will also give you that infographic that we showed as well, that example that the researchers have applied. So a really interesting piece of work and such a great conversation and an important conversation to have. So thank you to the three of you for your time and your efforts, much appreciated. And I would like to properly thank the panelists and remind you that we've been speaking to Dr. Pierre Lebodig, the COVID-19 Research Co-Lead from Monash University, Associate Professor Sri Astuti Tamrin, also a COVID-19 Research Co-Lead based at Universitas Hasanuddin, and John Delliston, Partner Asia Pacific for PwC in Jakarta. Thank you to all of you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bu. Gazia. And sitting back and taking all that in has been our next guest, our discussant for the session. Dr. David Neller is the Facility Director at Prospera, the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Economic Development. And Prospera has been working in Indonesia around these questions of a healthy and safe society, but one that also faces economic challenges. So, Dr. Neller, could you please step up, and we look forward to hearing from you based on what we've just heard from our panelists.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today. So I think the panelists have set out an incredibly important question around the policy choices that the government faces during this pandemic. Clearly impacts the well-being of many millions, if not the survival of millions.
And these questions continue today as we look forward to this holiday period, for example, and the government thinks about the appropriate policy settings to manage COVID and potentially the new variant. My argument or proposition is that the government, in fact, did very well through the Delta variant, the COVID-19 experience. Not that there are not enormous gaps in the health infrastructure, which had they been addressed earlier would have made the situation more manageable. But given the constraints that the government faced, it learned from the process, it refined policy, and made those choices between health and economy more manageable. Having said that, as some of the questions, such as on the rural city issue that was mentioned just before, these are excruciatingly difficult questions that the government has to tackle. And in a country as complex as Indonesia, this is no easy feat. So for Indonesia, I think as has been messaged already, the choice is really not one of lockdown or not. A lockdown in the way it's been seen in many countries would mean starvation for many people. So that's not an option. And likewise, no response, if you like, leaving the economy continue is not an option either, because of the health consequences, which will ultimately impact the economy anyway. I think John Doveston has mentioned many of the challenging aspects of the issue around informality and the like. Approximately 40% of the population are either under the poverty line of a few dollars a day or just above. So they're very vulnerable to any policy change that impacts economic activity. There are ways out, and a recent business survey we conducted showed that those companies that were using digital platforms or exporting were doing much better. But of course, for medium and small business, about 80% of those companies reported they don't know how to access or undertake business digitally. So there's a big challenge for the 99+% of more than 60 million companies in Indonesia to really survive through any significant closure. So I think in government's thinking on this question, they effectively had a model in their minds. It may not have been as sophisticated as Pierre and Bututi have presented, but the broad contours of that model, I think, were in their minds. Perhaps, if anything, one might add another dimension to the health and economics and add the social dimension as an important consideration in the thinking. So what I'd like to do now, though, is to share with you some experience that we had working with the government during the Delta variant period. So the president assigned the coordinating minister, Maritime and Investment, Luhut Panjaitan, to be in charge of initially Java and Bali provinces in terms of managing the various restrictions imposed. So, and working along with Ministry of Health, we were asked to support that effort. So perhaps if you could show the first slide, please. So this is the first step, if you like, which was actually just capturing on a daily basis the health status and activity levels of over 500 districts and cities across the whole of Indonesia. So the purpose of this was to manage the so-called lockdown, because an efficient lockdown would mean a shorter lockdown. So we used, with very short time notice, we used Facebook mobility, NASA satellite data, and Google traffic data, along with World Health Organization health categories for 1 to 4. And in parallel with this, we used very high frequency chatbot surveys to assess the social implications of the policy measures adopted. So this is a dashboard which we produced, showing, we have the detail overall for all of the districts, and then by district. And then each day we would meet with government in the evening and assess what parts of Indonesia were not following the policy appropriately or directly, and that would then result in a response by the minister or whatever the following day to look into the developments in a particular location. In some cases, we had physical visits to locations to understand what was happening at the micro level. So the right side actually shows some of those indexes and how we were able through action to get improvements in the area of activity. Next, we then progressed to start to try and be looking forward to estimate case trends against health capacity, and also to enable us to support the government to shape social protection. So I won't go through the model in any detail, but the red line, this is the Jakarta model. The red line shows hospital capacity, the dark line, the caseload, and our projections for developments of the virus. The right side is indicative of showing how the lags of changes in mobility affect case levels or infections with a lag. So all of this information started to be accommodated within government and presented at cabinet meetings and the like. The next phase, to next slide, please. The next phase was to look at a range of policy options to assess what are the trade-offs that might be available. For example, if the government was able to accelerate vaccination, what would that mean for enabling the restrictions to be raised or eased in terms of economic activity? So we have the mobility and positive, these are all, the dependent variable is the positivity rate. We have mobility, where we see the lagged impact of mobility on positivity. We have the mask wearing as our measure of social distancing. This is based on Ministry of Health data using camera source data. And we see that only above 80% do you start to see an impact of this masking on the positivity rate. And so to give a feel for this, the masking increased by 5 percentage points between January and around the middle of 2021, so that it's not easy to move this variable up or down. And then finally on the right side, at the time when this was developed, vaccination rates were very low. And so we did find that first vaccination rates started to have a positive effect once you got into double-digit rates of vaccination. There was very little in the way of data on second vaccination at that stage. So we just had to make an assumption on that score. So if we have these 4 policy variables, how do we then make choices across that? And in the next slide, we show a range of scenarios that indicate where we are. So I won't go through all of this, it's too detailed, but the left column with all the red was the sort of the no policy change case. And we see the positivity rate was running at about 25%, and it would take 12 weeks to get it just under 20% under no further policy change. We then explore with a range of scenarios what would happen if we relax mobility restrictions or we change mask wearing, we accelerate vaccination and so forth. And we see that with various policy combinations, you can reduce the positivity rate much more quickly. And this was helpful for the government as they looked to plan the timeline around restrictions. I think one point that was mentioned earlier in terms of the impact on business was one of the challenges here was we would be updating the data, as I say, on a daily basis and looking regularly, but that led to government making relatively frequent changes in policy, which some business found made it difficult for some business to plan, perhaps. So this gives just the framing, if you like, of what the government was thinking and doing. And this model was extended across the whole of Indonesia. But of course, as you move east, the quality of the data diminishes, and so it is more difficult. But nonetheless, the dashboard and these models can be used across the board. So next slide, please, my last slide. So I think, it certainly helped the government make targeting of restrictions more effective. We were able, for example, the government used in some cases restrictions such as allowing factories to continue to operate, but at 50% of workforce, such that social distancing could be maintained. The satellite data we were using allowed us to look at 500 square meters, so we could focus on what was happening in industrial estates. We could focus on different areas of that nature. So I think policy was strengthened across a range of areas. And what we saw in our latest survey on business, which we conduct with Bapanas, is that while revenue loss around that time was in the order of 20% of business, the adjustment of business was quite different to the earlier waves. There was far fewer layoffs, job layoffs, and business navigated more effectively with this more nuanced policy. We saw that consumer confidence also, while falling, did not fall as severely under this framework. And households have rebounded more quickly as social protection mechanisms improved. So thanks. I can take the slide off. So I think there's a few key messages that one can draw from this. First, of course, the context to start with. 270 million people, more than 5,000 inhabited islands, tremendous diversity, making policy making extremely complex and challenging. But we did find, I think, from this experience, that policy choices that are informed by strong evidence can really make a substantive difference. First, they clearly provide focus on decision-making. The government has clarity around what it has to decide, the implications and consequences of those decisions. Secondly, to pick up a point that Helen raised earlier, I think it does align policymakers. Some may have been interested in pursuing other interests, but they cannot dispute the hard evidence. I can tell you funny stories about responses to this use of satellite data, people turning off street lights and all sorts of things in some locations. But at the end of the day, the evidence is the evidence. And this really does help align policy more effectively. And third point, I think, is that it creates a really important learning environment for policymakers and analysts alike, because it does show how we can do better in the future. And I think that is certainly a lesson from Indonesia over the last couple of years, is that like every country, there was a shock at the beginning, when the pandemic, at the time of the outbreak, and then over time, policy making has become much more sophisticated and evidence-based. And as I said, we're now looking at what does it look like for Christmas, New Year period during this holidays? What sort of policy choices might make sense in order to contain the virus from leading into a further wave? So Helen, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, David. That was great to get that perspective on what had been done by policymakers and the data that had been used, and a bit of a look ahead as well. So thank you very much to David Neller, the Facility Director at Prospera, for his role as a discussant today at the PAIR Summit. And now to close the annual summit, I would like to invite Penny Williams, the Ambassador to the Republic of Indonesia for Australia, and she's going to make our closing remarks.
Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure to be invited to close this year's annual summit of the Partnership for Australia-Indonesia Research. Over the past 3 days of the summit, we've heard from many talented researchers, from engineers to social scientists to public health experts, alongside leaders in industry, public policy, and the wider community. These presentations have highlighted not only the scale of challenges that COVID-19 has presented across Australia and Indonesia, but importantly, how central collaboration between our countries has been to the development of new and innovative approaches to these challenges. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been working closely with our counterparts in the Indonesian government to deliver a targeted and timely response. Australia extended a $1.5 billion loan to support Indonesia's COVID-19 response and economic resilience, and we've pivoted our development programs to respond quickly, working closely with long-standing partners and in close collaboration with our colleagues in the Indonesian government to find solutions together. Australia has also delivered more than 4.5 million AstraZeneca doses to Indonesia. Australia has committed to provide over 20 million doses to Indonesia, 10 million doses from Australia's supply, and over 10 million more doses through our support for vaccine procurement. We have also delivered a range of other emergency support, working in close partnership with the Indonesian government, including oxygen concentrators, test kits, and PPE. Our assistance also includes a package of support designed to help address the impact of the pandemic on communities. This means supporting basic needs and food security, creating safe spaces for quarantine and isolation, providing psychological counselling to help with the pressures of the COVID era, and developing better communication products to counteract disinformation. This kind of targeted local assistance can only be delivered through close partnerships with trusted organisations working at the community level. That's why we are working with Indonesian, Australian and international NGOs, UN agencies, community organisations and provincial governments to make sure this help gets where it is most needed as quickly as possible. As things begin to open up here in Indonesia, I've been able to get out to meet more people and communities across Indonesia to see the difference this assistance has made. While we all know the pandemic isn't over yet, we're working hard now to build the strongest foundation possible to support a recovery that delivers for both of our countries. Our landmark trade agreement, the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or IASEPA, will be central to this recovery. This agreement is a critical framework for our mutual economic recovery, bringing the promise of a new generation of bilateral trade and investment opportunities. The Blueprint for Trade and Investment with Indonesia, launched by Minister Tian in Jakarta earlier this year, provides a roadmap for how businesses in Australia and Indonesia can grow their commercial links and develop new opportunities. IASEPA also includes a program of targeted support worth $40 million over 5 years to develop and grow partnerships between Indonesian and Australian businesses to generate inclusive growth. The program, Panelists, seeks to maximise the benefits of IASEPA for both countries and to explore the complementary needs of our countries. This powerhouse model of trade, where Australian inputs are transformed into world-class Indonesian exports, has long been the holy grail of trade relations between our countries. But the potential scope of IASEPA is far broader. Be it in agriculture, advanced manufacturing, or training and skills, Catalyst and the Blueprint will help businesses in both countries explore deeper partnerships to boost our bilateral trade and investment. And as borders reopen, there is greater potential for greater skills exchange between our countries. For example, as Australian tech talent helps build the next Indonesian unicorn, or as young professionals from Indonesia find their start in Australian firms. It's true that the pivot to digital delivery in Indonesia and globally has been remarkable in education, in conferences such as this one, and in commerce and in government. But we all know there is no substitute for direct human interaction. Tourism and education in normal times are at the very forefront of our bilateral engagement. Immediately prior to the pandemic, levels of direct people-to-people engagement between our countries were at all-time highs. The New Colombo Plan, which I know many of you will be familiar with, is a great example. Indonesia was the preferred country of choice for students leaving Australia on New Colombo Plan scholarships. And in the first 5 years of the New Colombo Plan, 10,000 Australian students spent time in Indonesia undertaking placements here at various stages of their university careers. We've kept momentum in programs like the NCP as best as we can virtually. And there's absolutely every indication that this sort of interest will persist when borders are able to reopen. Indonesian students too continue to see Australia as a priority destination for study and investment. Before the pandemic, we had around 20,000 Indonesian students enrolled in Australian universities. And again, we have every reason to believe this level of demand will continue as borders reopen. Tourism too was a bright spot, reflecting Australia's love affair with Bali and a growing number of Australians venturing farther for holidays and for business. Ladies and gentlemen, while there may still be challenges ahead, there's a great deal of cause for optimism in the potential for our countries to recover strongly together. So as I close the PAIR Annual Summit for 2021, I want to acknowledge once again and thank all those involved in making this event such a tremendous success. Virtual events aren't easy, but by coming together by any means possible, we are maintaining the critical momentum in our collaboration and continuing to deepen our understanding of the challenges and of the opportunities our countries share. So thank you to the researchers and speakers who participated in the summit for sharing your knowledge and insights. I also want to thank the Indonesian ministers who have spoken at the summit. Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Bapak Erlangga Hartarto, Minister for Health, Bapak Budi Gunadi Sadikin, and Deputy Minister at the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs, Bapak Odo R.M. Manahutu. Thank you also to the staff at the Australia-Indonesia Centre for their tireless work behind the scenes, making this event possible. I hope to see you all again next year, perhaps even in person. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Penny Williams, the Australian Ambassador to the Republic of Indonesia. And yes, wouldn't it be lovely if we can all catch up again next year, especially for the PAIR Summit. And as she mentioned, that is the end of the annual summit for 2021. Thank you so much for joining us today. And on other days, if you have, where we've looked at topics around disability, around, trying to remember now, it's been such a rich field of information, data, healthcare, so many things that our researchers have touched on throughout the year and brought some ideas forward. So we hope you've learned something from those sessions. As always, the webinars are available on demand and we'll have today's up as soon as we can. It should certainly be available over the next day or two. You can find the recordings of today and much more on the PAIR website. That's where there will also be information about the research that we've discussed. The link to the PAIR website will be posted in the chat. There's a short survey at the close of this webinar and we hope you can complete that. Would be much appreciated and will help us in creating better webinars in the future. I'd also like to give a big thank you to InASLI, the Indonesian Sign Language interpreters, to Pak Widodo and Bu Sonia, and also our audio translators, Langgua, for their excellent efforts today and always in ensuring that as many people as possible can join in on these conversations. I'm Helen Brown from the Australia-Indonesia Centre, and it's been a pleasure to be your moderator and host today. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and thank you and goodbye.